Tan Sri Zulfikly Abdul Razak. Dr. D. Zulfikly Abdul Razak is currently the Rector of the International Islamic University, Malaysia. He was the Vice Chancellor of the University Plains, Malaysia, USM from 2000 to 2011. He is the immediate past president of the International Association of Universities. He was the convener of the Regional Center for Expertise on Education for Sustainable Development. Sir was awarded the prestigious 2017 Gilbert Medal by Universitas 21 in recognition for his long-term commitment to sustainable approach to international higher education. He is a senior fellow of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia, the World Academy of Art and Science, and the World Academy of Islamic Management. Sir is an honorary professor at the University of Nottingham. He is an advisory board member, Institute of Sustainable Development and Learning at Leuphana University of Limburg, Germany. In February 2021, he was invited to serve as an expert for the Futures of Higher Education project at UNESCO's Institute for Higher Education. Sir was awarded the 2017 Toko Academic Negara National Academic Laureate and the recipient of number of honorary doctorates from various international universities. He was conferred Professor Emeritus by USM. Also, USIM conferred him an honorary doctorate of Taqwa and Islamic Management. Last year, he was conferred honorary doctorate of leadership in education by University of Cyber Gaya. In addition, the government of Japan, in recognition of his contribution to the academic collaboration and exchanges between the two nations, has conferred him the Order of the Rising Sun, Gold Race with Neck Ribbon in September 2019. Today, he will be addressing us on how we will embrace sustainability in the decolonized version. Let us all welcome him with a big round of applause.
Thank you very much for that generous citation. I would like to thank the organizer for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts about sustainability, something that we have been engaged for almost 2 decades now, but taking a very slightly different slant from what we understand, learning from what we have gone through in the last 2 decades or so. So if I can just share with you my slides. So given the time, I will start with what I think you already know, but very briefly give you the context of where I'm coming from. This whole idea of sustainable development from its present context is now 35 years old. And when we started with the Brundtland report and also the report that is known as Our Common Future, I want to underline the word our common future. It's about all of us together and trying to make a better world. And 35 years has gone past. Now, what do we learn from the 35 years? I think if you were to take a snapshot, one is about how do you mainstream the whole concept of sustainable development, beginning in the early 90s until today. I think we are still not progressing the way we wanted to do. But it's quite important to note, I think for the first couple of decades, we find that there is not enough take as far as sustainable development. And the reason is quite simple. There is no element of education in this. So beginning from the year 2005, when we added what we call the Decade of Education for Sustainable Development, then you can see the pickup rates go very, very well until the end of the decade, which is on the 2014. And the 2014, I think by then we were expecting that we can end poverty. But certainly this is not happening, and therefore we need to progress into what is next. And what is next is what we call the post-15 sort of agenda, which talk about sustainable development goal with SDG. Prior to this, we talk about MDG, which is a Millennium Development Goal. And the agenda is, as mentioned here, there are a number of elements I think that we have learned that we need to put in. One is a question of inclusion, that everybody is on this together. Unlike the Millennium Development Goal, there seems to be certain group people are doing certain things and not everybody capturing the same sort of motivation and aspiration. Yeah? Here it's about sustainable development, the cliche that leave no one behind, and how do we become sustainable in the context of the environmental constraint and the environmental limit, all directing to equity. In other words, regardless of people, regardless of country, regardless of a location, how do people fare as much as possible in terms of fairness, in terms of justice? And it's not just the number of goals, but how do you scale it? In other words, how many people around the world will be able to benefit from this from this initiative that we are taking? And therefore, it is a universal concept that everybody share this thing, but it is owned nationally because we believe the contexts are quite different. India will have to do it in their own way, Malaysia will have to do its own way, but yet all of us can rally into one point that everybody at the end of the day will share the same benefit in terms of a just and a more harmonious society. And that makes it a kind of a comprehensive sort of agenda, that everybody gets involved, that everyone actually is put into the same sort of criteria, stature, and it is all then needs to be integrated with one another. So although we have 17 goals, then the difficulty is how to connect this. So if you talk about goal number 4, it's about quality education. How does it connect to, for example, goal number 13? The question of climate change. Yeah? How does it connect to the goal number 16, which is about peace, which is about a strong institution, justice? How does it connect to number 1, poverty, and so on and so forth? So the connection is, I think, is equally important. Rather than doing just one goal, doing one goal is not sustainable in that particular concept. So connecting the dots, making it integrated, so that the framework will be a comprehensive framework, is one of the challenges that all of us need to meet as far as the sustainable development goals are concerned. Right? So this will be the framework that we are talking about, the values of inclusion, equity, transformation, the context, yeah, and how to integrate it together. So generally, this is called the post-2015 agenda. It was announced, I think, in New York in September 2015, that we are migrating from the Millennium Development Goal to the Sustainable Development Goal, with the idea that there is only one set of goals, not number of sets of goals. So we belong to one planet, and therefore there must be one set of goals. And you can see how difficult this is, because that single planet will have about 8 billion people as today. So how do you share this among the 8 billion people? Certainly 60% of them are not as lucky as the other 40%. How do you make this happen is a challenge that all of us need to sort of go through. Yeah? Just to give you an idea, you can already see when we talk about world population, certainly India, China has a double digit in terms of percentage. The rest are single digit, but yet we're living on one planet, and therefore the kind of distribution, the kind of segmentation that we need to understand is how to make everybody, quote unquote, getting the same results at the end of the day. Yeah. But as today, I think these results are still not forthcoming. We understand this whole idea of global warming, climate change, and the many things that everybody else is facing because of the inequitability and because of the injustice around it. Yeah? To give you an example, if you look at just the carbon emissions alone, but in the year 2013, the statistics says that the developed countries, say United States, Russia, Japan, and Germany alone, 50% of the carbon emissions come from these five countries alone, let alone the rest. I mean, there are many more, certainly developed countries, but these 5 countries alone already account for 50% of the carbon emission. The population are certainly small as compared to China and India and, of course, the rest of the world. So those are the kind of issues that I think we are faced with when we talk about sustainability, and there must be sort of an equitable solution to this. And the equitable solution depends on how we actually understand it. Do we allow countries to go on their own and decide what they want to do, or do we share this and make sure that everybody is on the same page as far as understanding sustainability is concerned? Yeah, because at the end of the day, we need to decide. As a global population, we need to decide where to go. Do we carry on with what we have been doing? In other words, taking this route at the end of the day, coming into what they call the hothouse Earth, when we sort of transgress the planetary threshold of what sustainability is all about, given the many things that we human beings are doing? Or do we take a different turn where we go into how to stabilize? In other words, many of the things that we do need to change. The whole perspective of whether we own the earth or nobody owns the earth is something that I think we need to decide. And that depends on how we actually look at what sustainable development is concerned. And this is where I come with the idea of decolonizing. Yeah, for the last 12,000 years or so, we are in what we call the Holocene age, meaning to say that our environment is conducive for us to build our own civilization. Despite the many challenges, we are able to build the civilization the way it is now. But now we are going into another age, which is called the Anthropocene age. This is the age where human beings begin to dismantle its own civilization through the many things that we do, global warming, climate change, and the other things that we're going to talk about. So where is it the transaction? At this point here, we really need to decide, and I think we are almost there, whether we need to take this route or we need to take that one, depending on what we do. And if we make the wrong calculation, then I think all of us will be in a kind of situation, a predicament that we might have to pay a very high price to it in terms of the survival of the human species itself. Yeah? So this is a very important question that we need to decide together, particularly as an institute of education that gives information to the young generation of what it is all about. So to understand sustainability, therefore, there are many components that we need to look at. Now, although the preoccupation has always been economy, now we say we need to balance it with two other variables or factor. There is environment and society. I think most of you would know this. And this is where I think the whole concept of sustainable development becomes more tangible as far as concerned. Yeah, we talk about the sustainable economy, all right, but is it sustainable? In other words, does it bring about social equity? Does it look after the environment? Yeah. So we talk about not just jobs. We talk about how do you get people included in this whole idea of building a civilization, as it were, sparing all the other things that we have seen as far as environment is concerned. So we summarize this as the three P's: a planet, people, profit. And profit now has been translated to prosperity, because profit alone does not give a good idea of what sustainability is all about. Prosperity means how do we build or give an equitable distribution among the population as a whole. So the three P's will be one of the goals of trying to arrive at a sustainable development in terms of community and so on and so forth. Yeah, I like this what you call the mind map, just to tell you how complicated this can be. At every point of our life, sustainability plays a role. Be it travel, be it lighting, be it spaces, be it your own computer, everything has got an implication of sustainable development as far as this is concerned. And therefore, to understand this, to the very finer details of it, is something that we want to actually make kind of an awareness that especially the younger generation will then try to mitigate some of the issues that we are facing today. I will just leave it at that, and we'll talk a little bit about it. So I'm coming down now to then what is sustainable development. And by definition, according to the Brunton report, or our common future, as we told it, there is the sustainable development is that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. I think this is almost given. Everybody will talk about this. But what is important for me is that you have to talk about the present. We talk about the future. My question is therefore, where is the past? Why is the past not part of this equation when we talk about sustainable development. And the reason why I ask this is simple. I think this diagram or this picture will demonstrate it. In 2004, this glacier in Uppsala in Argentina is a nice and beautiful lake. All right. And if we start from the past, then this is where we need to move on as a kind of a criteria or the baseline, as it were. But if you move back to the past, then you see what happened. In the year 1928, maybe 30 years before, you see there's glaciers all over. There's not even lake at all. So in other words, when we want to define what the future is all about, where do we start? Do we start at the point of the compromised future? Or do we start at the actual value of where the past is all about? Do we start with a glacier or do you start with a lake? Yeah. And why do I ask this question? Because the whole notion of sustainable development is not a new notion. For us in this part of the world, when we talk about sustainable development, there are many examples that we can quote that tells us sustainable development has been part of our culture, our way of life for a long time. And I take this classical example of Bali. Yeah, and Bali, the small island of Indonesia there, is famous for this terrace sort of rice growing. And they extend to thousands and thousands of acres. And this has its own idea, what we call the subak system, which is a way of organizing this rice growing activity. And it is guided by spiritual values combined with modern, what we call knowledge like engineering, that creates a kind of a structure that is covering the whole the sort of society as such. Yeah? It promotes, I want to underline this, a harmonious relationship between people, the spirit, and also the environment. At the end of the day, it's about the concept of happiness, a concept of well-being, where they call in the context, I think there's almost Sanskrit, I think, Trikita Karana. How do the three things meet in the context of relationship, but maintaining the balance and the harmony of what things used to be, and it is not disturbed. So that is the concept of sustainable development way back when we talk about Bali, and it goes back to 1,000 years. So this is 1,000 years experience as far as our culture is concerned, that is the Asian culture is concerned, compared just to the 35 years or the 3 decades that I was describing to you when we talk about sustainable development. So the question we ask is that what is it when we talk about sustainable development that we are missing if we do not take the past into consideration? I just want to show this. These are some of the things that they've been doing, the rituals with regard to the subak. All of this, I think, has meanings as far as culture is concerned, and these meanings are integrated in the development of the rice growing activities and also the economy. So we see a lot more question of spirituality, things that we are not very fond of talking today. We just talk about the tangibles, we don't talk about the intangibles, but here both of it are well combined in understanding what sustainable development is all about within the context of Asia and so on and so forth. That is one example. Another classical example, I'm sure you know, you're closer to Bhutan, I think the north part of India. And this is another example. When Bhutan talks about sustainable development, they talk about in a very different form. See, in the year 1729, the legal code of Bhutan already mentioned something to do with sustainable development. And it says, if the government cannot create happiness, which is social harmony, for its people, then there is no purpose for a government to exist. This is something which is quite different from what we understand what governments do today. Most governments, I think, today make create more what they call gloom and doom rather than happiness, at least in the last decade or so as we go into the 21st century. Now, Bhutan is quite specific when we talk about development, the role of the government. It is about creating happiness. And how do they do this? This is not just words. It is something that they have thought of before. And I just want to take a footnote of this. Yeah? When Bhutan was talking about happiness in the 1700s, that was the first time when we see the first industrial revolution in Europe. All right? And you can see later on the contrast between what the industrial revolution brings and what is it that the Bhutanese wants to do at the same period in history as far as that is concerned. So what does Bhutan do now? The effect of this, Bhutan is now known as the first world that has got a carbon negative, right? Talk about developed countries, wherever they are, yeah, and whatever economy, they are not carbon negative as far as this is concerned, and Bhutan has achieved it, yeah. And Bhutan remains the only country until today, yeah, despite the 30 years of sustainable development, remains carbon negative as compared to other parts of the world. No countries has been carbon negative, and indeed, by the year 2030, Bhutan has promised to reach a zero net greenhouse gas emission and produce zero waste. I think no country has even dared to make this promise the way Bhutanese has done. So in other words, the Bhutan has got a concept that they believe they can arrive at this point, and that concept is something to do with sustainable development in their own context and the notion of what it is in terms of culture and also the norms of the Bhutanese. Yeah? So a kingdom where happiness is valued over GDP. When everybody is talking about numbers, Bhutan is talking about something which is quite vague, which is quite intangible in a sense. I think at the point when they talk about this, many people laughed at them. How do you actually measure a happiness? Yeah, but it is quite clear now. Whatever report that we read, particularly that comes from United Nations, the word happiness, the word well-being is embedded. Although some people are not sure how it is valued, but the word happiness and well-being is embedded despite whatever numbers of GDP we're talking about, right? So you can see Bhutan, and not only in terms of environment, the way things are preserved and the way the things are kept, right? No high-rise building, no skyscrapers, no LRT or whatever it is. Not only in terms of the environment and in terms of the harmony in the way this life is done. I think a picture that I actually cherish, there's the king playing football with the school children in one of the provinces in Bhutan, right? And I cannot imagine anywhere else where the king barefooted play football with a group of people, especially young children. Yeah. So the Constitution of Bhutan recently in 2008 talked about the state shall strive and promote conditions that will enable the pursuit of gross national happiness. So this is where I think we begin to see where it is lacking as far as the so-called sustainable development in the context of the Brunson report. The word happiness do not even appear as a kind of a outcome as far as sustainable development is concerned. I just want to quote a little bit more just to give us a clarity of what the G&H is all about, which is a measure of quality in a holistic way. I want to underline the word holistic, and believe that the beneficial developments of human society, not a technological or modern society per se, where materials and spiritual developments occur side by side and complement with one another. So we are not saying that the physical or the economic part is not important, but how do we complement it to make it holistic for the benefit of human society? And they've got their own, of course, model, where 4 dimensions of good governance, cultural religions, ecological religions, and of course the word sustainable and balanced economic developments become the so-called the factors, yeah, that they are constantly monitoring and to find out whether this is part of the G&H or how this is developing. All right. So I think just to add on to this, the Prime Minister make a good statement. I thought that many of us, when we talk about happiness, we talk about this pleasurable, good feeling mood. For them, it is not. We know the true abiding happiness cannot exist while others suffers and come from only serving others. So this whole idea of how do we live as a human society, coexisting and serving each other to make sure that suffering is limited, not only to yourself, but also to your neighbors and to humanity as such, living in harmony with nature, realizing the innate wisdom and the true brilliance of nature of our own minds. I think this is where we begin to see that the concept of sustainable development is just beyond any material goods, just beyond any externalities. It also involves us as a human being. And I think that's a point to note as we move on trying to understand what sustainability is all about. And I hope I can convey that in my talk, right? So if you go back to then the development, so-called, quote unquote, when we begin with the agricultural society, you can imagine this is a Bhutan in the West, maybe. Okay, it looks like Bhutan in the West, no high-rise and no overt sort of development as such. But things begins to change when we talk about the Industrial Revolution or the industrialization beginning from the year 1700s. Remember my footnote? When the Bhutan talked about happiness and government in the 1970s, we already begin, I think, the Industrial Revolution then. And you can see just from the curve alone, how we actually transect life into a very, very difficult sort of progress, yeah? That see the first Industrial Revolution, the second Industrial Revolution, the third, and now everybody is talking about the fourth Industrial Revolution. Unfortunately, when we talk about the fourth Industrial Revolution, we talk about the fourth Industrial Revolution as though it is an episode by itself. It is not. It is a continuum of activities. For example, Revolution 1, Revolution 2 has already caused a number of impacts on human life, on society, and also on nature. Right, and moving on will carry those excess baggage as it were. So whatever numbers that we take now, be it temperature right down to ozone depletion, this exponential growth will be the outcome at the end of the day when we talk about this industrial level. Right? And this is what I think differentiate what Bhutan is talking about, or the Asian way of understanding of sustainable development as compared to what it is now. By the year 1950s, we begin to resign to the idea that everything will go on acceleration, yeah. But yet we understand from our own experience, everything that goes up must come down. So we cannot be progressing in an upward trend all the time without taking the risk that it will collapse one day. And indeed, I think this has already been predicted. There's a book that came out, I think, some years ago that talks about the collapse of the Western civilization, particularly on this notion of just this exponential growth, the limiting way of development, unsustainable as it were. And this book gives us almost a year. By the year 2093, it says, if this goes on and carry on the way it is, then we probably will face this collapse of the Western civilization. This is where the Anthropocene that I was talking about, where we begin to dismantle our own civilization, the one that we've built over the 10,000 of years before that, right? So this is the hallmark of what sustainable development is all about if you are not careful of what the definition of how you take it on in trying to interpret sustainable development. We can take this into another way of looking at it by seeing how the kind of the downward trend. Yeah, when we talk about the first industrial revolution, we talk about the steam engine. Fine, it is good. It helps us in development, transportation, and so on. But we fail to talk about the pollution that the steam engine produces. Yeah? When we talk about the mass production of the second industrial revolution, again, we fail to talk about the kind of smoke and all sorts of other pollution that comes out, which now becomes part and parcel of the problem when we talk about global warming, climate change. It is not a new problem. It is a 300-year problem. When we do the industrial revolution, then we do not take into account the downside. We only talk about the positive things. Yeah? And then we realize that, okay, we need now to move into clean energy and clean industrialization, and we create computerization. It looks clean, it's fine, yeah. But now the downside is no longer external; it becomes an internal issue. So we have the problem of loneliness. You have the problem of isolation. You have a problem of making contacts with people. At the end of the day, the issue of mental health, the issue of emotional health becomes the biggest issue. Now the issue is now just no longer outside. The issue has gone into the human self itself. Yeah, and when we see this, we read many of these articulation of what this means. There's a classical, write-ups by Times that talk about the me generation. And I just want to quote one of the, write-ups. It says that 40% of this me generation believe that they should be promoted every 2 years regardless of performance. I mean, that's a kind of values that comes out of this way of looking at what the Industrial Revolution is all about. And we begin to see other forms, what we thought the Generation X, Generation Y, or whatever it is, that becomes now a key factor in terms of this acceleration. These are the generations. If we do not educate them well, if we do not know what sustainable development is all about, become the generation accelerator, they are the one that will continue to push the upward trend or the exponential growth, as it were, and as we have mentioned, it could cause the collapse of the current civilization, as it were. So based on this is where I thought we need now to go back and understand where we come from as far as civilization is concerned, as far as values is concerned, and indeed in the context of what I call the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and how to decolonize it, and how do you bring values back that were missing in our midst now, given this kind of historical dimension that we have got. And Bhutan, when they do this tracking, and they do this tracking quite often, and I think in 2010, when they look at the age, and they say 25, age of 25, 21 to 25, the highest age group, we are the happiest as far as age growth, probably it will drop down a little bit. But we are now focusing on just this young generation that moves forward, right? Contrast this with this kind of a statement, and we can see this. As you find that the GDP goes up, you find that GNP also goes up at the same time. It is not the other way around. So there is a correlation between what happiness and GDP is all about. And if you see the other side of the story, I think everybody knows this girl. She's 15 years age. At one point in 2018, when she started to making this strike in front of the Swedish Parliament and say, I don't want to go to school because schooling is no longer relevant to me. And she doesn't seem to be the happiest person in the world as compared to the Bhutanese statistic. She made statements like this: you, referring to my generation, the older generation, are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. I mean, it's a kind of animosity that now has grown into the younger population, trying to understand where they will go as far as the future is concerned, and they're trying to find who is at fault. And certainly there are generations before her that do not understand sustainable development in the context now, are put in a position that need to account for what is happening in the world today. So you can see this contrast as you understand where values are as far as the younger generation is concerned, and where the values are in other parts of the world. But these statements, I think, actually change many of the things that I believe in. And Peter Drucker, I'm sure you know, is from management, is one of the gurus of management. And he say we are becoming aware that the major questions regarding technology are not technical questions, but human questions. You go back to this whole idea of being holistic, the whole idea of being, balanced between the technical and the human dimension. And we are not missing some of these points, because when you talk about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, as far as I can see, we just talk about the technology. It's not the human being that comes into question. How do you humanize technology is not the question, and how actually we mechanize human being is probably more the question than the other way around when we talk about the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And hence the question becomes a very crucial question for us, because our humanity, the humanness, the kind of value that we subscribe for a long time will be up in the difficult challenge moving forward. Yeah. So I think this is, again, a classic example where we see the world, as I've mentioned, the 10,000 years before, where it is very conducive to build an environment. The greenhouse effect wasn't a problem. But now when we go into what we call the anthropogenic means it begins with us. We create all these greenhouse effects, and therefore the global warming, the climate change, and many of the things that we are facing today are the outcome of this. It is our own doing in this particular context, right? I would like to share you a video maybe that could summarize this, and hopefully that this video will give you
You okay? You need a minute? Cool. Okay. Listen up, people. I know a thing or two about extinction. And let me tell you, and you'd kind of think this would be obvious, going extinct is a bad thing. And driving yourselves extinct? In 70 million years, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. At least we had an asteroid. What's your excuse? You're headed for a climate disaster, and yet every year governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now. Think of all the other things you could do with that money. Around the world, people are living in poverty. Don't you think helping them would make more sense than, I don't know, paying for the demise of your entire species? Let me be real for a second. You've got a huge opportunity right now. As you rebuild your economies and bounce back from this pandemic, this is humanity's big chance. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes. Thank you.
This is a video that comes from UNDP. It's not one of the TikTok things that trying to persuade us to do something. I think this is almost a real sort of situation. The sad part is that we need to learn from the dinosaur to save our human life. Yeah. The reality is also on the ground is such. Yeah. As we talk about sustainable development, I think the footprint as far as nations are concerned, it is not equitable. Here we have got in the year 2008, and I'm sure it is still very true today. When you talk about living in the US, you are living on the resources of 5 planets, right? In Canada, maybe 4 planets, United Kingdom and mainly part of Europe, 3 planets, and Chile, 1 planet, and Thailand, maybe many other parts of the world, less than 1 planet. I mean, this is where we go back to the very premise that we've got only 1 planet and we need to share with the 8 billion population, but already the sharing is not equitable to start off with, right? And this, I think, is the issue at hand. How do you make this equitable? In other words, the extra 4 planets that the USA is using, they need to return it to somebody else because it's not part of them. And similar to Canada and the UK and the rest. It's only entitled to 1 planet. And how can we make this happen when you talk about equity, when you talk about sharing and making everything fair for other people? That is the issue. I think that most of us have not begun to articulate it, maybe sensitive, but at the end of the day, unless you solve this issue, then I think sustainable development will not meet its target because it starts on a very unequal platform as such, right? So why this happened, I think is again because how we construct our own existence, our own society, the way we lived, and I would call this an egocentric thing, because at the end of the day, it's all about us and ourselves. everybody else around us is not as important. And you can quote this from many examples. And we have got this kind of a rendering of being hierarchical, being rigid. It's about me and me alone. You compete with everybody else to make sure that you are ahead. What we call the red ocean, in contrast to the blue ocean. And it's almost a dead sort of structure that do not move with time. It is difficult to get a pyramid to change over time because of the structure the way it is. And what we need to do now to go away from this is to go into an eco-friendly and to say that everything is more equitable, more egalitarian, more flat. And this is what society used to be in the past. It is not something which is not something new. And the words that we use today is network, flexible. It's about us. How do we collaborate with one another? It's a blue ocean, in other words, going into routes that people have not gone before. And it's a living thing because it changes all the time, depending on the situation we are in. And we need to adapt to this. And the pandemic tells us this. Once the pandemic comes in, most of us are unable to adapt because the structure that we got within ourselves is not a structure that's for adaptability. Yeah? So we go back to what our Mr. Dinosaur been saying. This is a humanity big chance. How do you capitalize this? How do you make it happen? To make it happen is to understand where is the whole idea of sustainable development in the context of the ecology comes into picture. And like they say, it is now or never. We miss this, we probably miss a whole chance of a lifetime. What this means to me is basically this structure needs to go. This structure is no longer able to cope with the post-pandemic, or in fact, even without the post-pandemic, this is not the way to do when you talk about exponential growth. Nature tells us the only things that grow is the cancer cells. And you know what happens to the cancer cells at the end of the day. It kills its host and it kills itself. And the world, I think, is almost now like a cancer cell. And therefore, you need to phase this out. And I think this is where institutions like you and mine will have to have this responsibility, how to phase it out. And the way to phase this out is to go back to understanding what sustainability as a way of life, as a way of being, because we are brought into nature with this kind of a value system attached to us. And for that, I want to bring this suggestion. When we look at the past, I keep on talking about balance, harmony. And this is, I think, the value that have been missed out when you talk about a sustainable development in its present context, the way it is defined. And this is not new, because if you look at the human heritage as far as knowledge is concerned, you see this in all cultures. In Japan, it is called ikigai. In Sweden, it's called lagom. In China, in Korean, it's called nunchi. In Philippines, it's called ugnayan. Ubuntu in Africa, yin and yang. Maori in New Zealand. And we've got Sejahtera in our parts of the world, the Malay archipelago or the Nusantara as well. These are common heritage that can link us with one another and talks about what we call the balance and how do you live harmoniously. The word may be different, but the articulation is the same. Let me give you an example. Yeah? When we talk about the pandemic, what do we do actually is trying to restore the balance again by wearing masks. I mean, there's nothing magical about this. It is a simple thing that we begin to isolate ourselves and create this balance between where the virus needs to go and where we need to live. And that is already a very simple idea of trying to, dispense with all these other chemicals and medicines, which is there, but it is more expensive and not everybody can afford it. So this whole idea of balance is very important. The washing of hands, the physical distancing are all about restoring this balance again when we have a challenge of this nature. Give you an example. If you talk about ikigai, it's a Japanese word for reason for encompassing joy, a sense of purpose and meaning, a feel of well-being, credited as a factor of longevity and happiness. Right? So the Japanese subscribe to this. When they woke up in the morning, this sense of ikigai is the one that pushed them to move forward. When they talk about the Maoris in New Zealand, they talk about it as a kind of a founding value that inform ethical concept on the practices of unity, spirituality, relationship, and guardianship. Yeah? And it has its own way of manifesting in their lifestyle. Right? So they again conform to this way of living that brings all this together in a unified form, in a balanced form. In Sweden, the word lagom is very, very direct, translated as moderation in balance, perfect, simple, suitable in matters of amount, not too much, not too little, just right. I mean, it cuts across whatever notion of the past in whatever context. I think this is a value that cuts across, that we have not even tried to attempt to bring it together as a kind of a solution for sustainable development worldwide. Yeah? Africa has got the word Ubuntu. I don't have to go into this, but the word Ubuntu itself, I am because you are, and there are many other things that we can talk about in terms of this common heritage as far as Ubuntu is concerned in the values that we are trying to talk about. Yeah. So I want to end with this idea that we are trying to work as far as Malaysia is concerned, or at least this part of the world, that you use the word sejahtera. How does it actually configure and understand this as in the context of sustainable development? We begin with the notion that we are spiritual being, we are emotional being, rather than just physical being. We begin with the notion that there are standard sets of values that we need to aspire to and need to make it real. And this is what sejahtera is all about. It all come in a holistic form. It is not separated the way I present it to you. This is just for demonstration. But it's in a very holistic sense that it comes together to make that human person. Now, once this is there, then I think we begin to talk about the other dimension, the intellectual dimension, the cognitive dimension, the psychological dimension that then supports this. And it is supported in a way that these two will work in tandem with one another. Yeah, it's just like a guitar. You have this thing resonating with one another. I think this is a dimension that is not well articulated in the understanding or the modern understanding of sustainable development, so much so that I think we missed out some of the major issues that we have. And this is a microcosm that we need to develop sustainability, sustainable within ourselves before we go out. The micro balance must be maintained within us. And once that is maintained, then I think we can start looking where we need to go as far as making it real, be it from the ecological point of view, the economic point of view, the cultural for sure, and societal point of view. And this is where the macrocosm is. How did the macrocosm and the microcosm works together in a balance, in harmony? So we are not talking just about the individual, but the integration, individual and the environment, just like what Bali is doing. You and yourself, you and your environment, you and the people around you, and you and the creator. All this must fall into a kind of a balance that makes you sustainable to start off with. Yeah. So I've got this word spices here. If you take all the spiritual, emotional, and you assemble that, you have the word, you have the acronym spices, just to remind us, these are the things that we need to play around with so that the balance is maintained throughout our lifestyle. And this is part of education, I think, that most of us has missed. Yeah? So at the end of the day, the idea of sustainable development given, quote unquote, from the decolonized form is how do you create this balance between the macro and the microcosm. And this is what we call the sejahtera principles of balance, so that at the end of the day, we will strike the best way to create the balance as we move on as a human person. I want to just demonstrate you for another way of looking at it, right? Here you have the first level of being human, the three things that we talk about, the spiritual, emotional, and ethical. And this is where the heart becomes important. In modern education, the heart is not seen as something which is instrumental. In our culture, certainly the heart is another seat of intellect apart from the mind and apart from the brain. And it interacts, as I mentioned, yeah, with the other parts of the human minds and connectivity and so on and so forth. And this is where the balance between the mind and the heart becomes an important issue as far as maintaining the microcosm is concerned. Upon mastering this, then I think we then begin to see how we can manage the environment as such. And this is where the macrocosm is. It could be the ecology, the economics, culture, and social, and all of this must stay in a state of a balance. And that is sustainable development from its original idea of what the human person is all about. And that is, I think, what is missing now when we talk about sustainable development in the context of the modern understanding of what sustainable development. It goes in different words, but I think the meaning is perhaps the same. So I want to conclude by looking at this. We talk about this in a kind of a decolonized way. In other words, bringing back what we have lost because of colonialism that takes us away and plonk somebody else into us. I happened to see this, a 2-day seminar of decolonizing of the Indian minds. Not just the Indian minds, I think the human minds need to be decolonized so that we moved away from this whole idea of students are prepared only for workforce. Yeah, but they have other things that we need to talk about. What is the purpose of the education in the new reality post-pandemic is an issue that we need to address. I talk about the Maoris. The Maori has got 10 skills for non-Maori Kiwis. What is it that we need to look at in trying to decolonize it? Yeah? And last but not least, this is what United Nations and UNESCO is doing. UNESCO itself has got a webinar series on decolonizing education for sustainable futures. I think we have come to a point now we need to look into this and how do you bring new concepts, new ideas so that sustainable development becomes more widespread in a very natural way. It's not an imported concept from somewhere. It is a concept that we have lost and we need to resurrect it and then use it in trying to create sustainable development in the most natural way. And this is something that UNESCO has done early last year and as a kind of effort to decolonize education and bringing back what sustainable development is all about within the context of every society. I think I will stop there. Thank you very much. I hope we can discuss a little bit of this. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I thank you for your kind attention. Assalamualaikum and a greeting of peace.
So can we have few questions in case it is okay with you? So can we have few questions in case it is okay for you?
You can use the chat option.
Can you?
So can we have few questions in case it is okay for you? So can you hear us?
Yes,
Can you?
I can hear you well. No
Yeah.
problem.
Okay.
So can we take few questions if it is okay for you?
Is there something in the chat? I'm not too sure. No.
Can you hear us, please?
So can you hear us?
Asking about steps they're taking to decolonize education.
Let's see. Yes, go ahead. If there are any question, I'll try and to answer them to the best that I could.
Sure, sir. The participant would be definitely interested in asking the questions, and we would now keep the house open for the questions. Any questions are encouraged.
Okay, there is a question in the chat here. Share some steps to decolonize education. Okay, I will share you with what we are trying to do. I think if I will share you this. This is a book that we have written. It is called the Sejahtera Academic Framework. I think since 2 years ago, we have now revised how education should be conducted in my university to bring the whole idea of sustainable development within our own context. And because it's an Islamic university, we also take some of the religious percepts into understanding what sustainable development is all about in the context of spirituality, for example. Yeah. So one of the ideas that we are talking about, although you have got 17 sustainable development goals, we are now creating Sustainable Development Goal 18, which is about spirituality. We think that is an important value that is not being discussed or it's not being mainstream in education in Malaysia. And my researchers are working on the Sustainable Development 18, which is spirituality, which then connects the human heritage that I talked to you about. When you talk about spirituality, I think it's easier to find a common platform regardless of who you are or where you are, because spirituality, I think, is almost inborn or inherent with us, that we can connect, just like the words of Ikigai, Lagom, Ubuntu, and so on and so forth. So we need to work on the structure itself, because the structure itself is a very colonizing structure. We begin to choose, for example, when we talk about the heart in education, where is the heart in education? I think there is a quote, if I'm not mistaken, by Aristotle. It said, education without the heart is not education at all. And during the Industrial Revolution, exactly, is where this whole idea of emotions, the whole idea of the heart were taken out. And because this is seen as not scientific, you cannot quantify, and therefore this whole idea, management idea, anything gets measured, gets done, becomes the ruling sort of principle that if you cannot measure it, forget it. So I think these are issues that we need to begin to question and bring it back if we want to make sure that we are still within the context of understanding sustainable development in our cultural dimension, not taking somebody else's dimension. At the end of the day, we need to connect with one another, given those kind of perspectives. So we have done our share, and I think in this book there is, if I can just show you again, that is the quote unquote the new structure now that takes on other dimension at the same time when we define what education is all about and understand what sustainable development is. You have to work on it and try to make it relevant as far as your community is concerned.
Just ask, how are the colonizers, the West, responding to this?
If I can show you another book, there's also another thesis where we talk about sejahtera, to make everybody understand when you talk about sustainability, the word for us is sejahtera, and it has a meaning to us, and that meaning is something which is again very closely connected with our cultural values and cultural norms. So sustainability has got a very unique sort of understanding as far as Malaysia is concerned. And we are pioneering that in our university. I see Yazdi pictures there. Maybe Yazdi can help me with what's going on in Malaysia. He's also very much part and parcel of this.
Yazdi, can you listen to us?
The video. Requested you to check the audio. I don't know. I don't know whether you can hear me, but I certainly.
We can hear you, but can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Unless, yeah.
Razak, this is Sanjay speaking.
Okay, I think there's another question here, which is also very interesting. How do the colonizers from the West is reporting? It depends on who you work with. Right now, I think we are running a 6-day workshop together with the University of Victoria in Canada, and we are using the same concept. And these Canadians are people who are very mindful of the First Nation. The one that owns the land before they came in, and they are talking about the same language. In fact, my Canadian friend, before they start their discussion, they will pay tribute to who the land belongs to. So it depends on who you work with. But I think the whole idea of trying to decolonize education is not something which is new. I think everybody after the pandemic talks about what we need to do to decolonize education, because the pandemic tells us that education throughout the world is very much colonized. All Black Lives Matters, I think, is the rallying call actually. It's not only the Black Lives Matters, it's also the whole idea of colored people in this particular context. So the awareness about decolonizing education, I think, is a well-spread idea, but how to do it is a question that all of us must then begin to look at our past and find out what are the important elements that needs to be brought in. And this whole idea of ranking, I'm not too sure whether India is into this, ranking by times, by QS, are basically an instrument of colonialism. They will tell you what to do and who you are, and then they will rank you. We have never been consulted on this, but yet they are using this as a kind of a determinant to say how good or how bad you are. And I don't think this is something that we can tolerate if you want to actually decolonize as such. So how many people actually are aware and making this good in moving forward is something that I hope this conference will help to decide. I think this conference seems to be a very magnanimous conference, and I hope you can share some of your experience. I think India is more revolutionary in decolonizing the country as compared to Malaysia. The population is larger, and I think the intellectual level is also very high. So how can we work together to make this happen?
We certainly look forward to working together, sir. This was indeed an amazing experience for us to listen to you. We have been following the work being done in Malaysia. The Third World Network that's based out of Malaysia has done pioneering work. Thank you for all the publications. I know there are a number of questions around, but for the paucity of time, we will not be bothering you with too many questions. What we will do is we will forge an alliance with your institution and us and take this dialogue and conversation forward so that something complete can happen. So thank you, and we are grateful for your time, sir.
Thank you very much, and I'm indebted to you, and let's hope and we can work together.
So I would invite our conference chairperson, Professor Sanjoy Mukherjee, to felicitate our guest.
Dengar orang ni talk yang less tu. Okay.
Dr. Razak, are you there? Hello? Dr. Razak, can you listen to us?
I can still hear you. I want to listen to the next lecture if you don't mind.
Okay, please, you're most welcome. But before that, sir, from the bottom of our heart, not our head only, we offer our gratitude to you for this wonderful presentation. And there are so many things in common, it's in resonance with the kind of work we are trying to do humbly for the last 12 to 15 years. And as a token of our gratitude, we, on behalf of SusCon 9, on behalf of IIM Shillong, offer you a memento, in acknowledgement of your wonderful contribution.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this pleasant surprise. Not many conferences do this, so I'm very grateful for your recognition. Thank you very much.
It will be sent to you by post over time, sir. Right?
Yes.
And I also take this opportunity to thank two of the persons who are sitting online. One, our very old good friend, Yasri Jahangir Bantwala, who had helped me to get in touch with Dr. Razak. Great thanks from IIM Shillong and SusCon 9 to you for your gracious presence and for all your help.
Yes, same to me. Yeah, ESD has been very helpful since I know him. So next time he needs to also give some speech. And I think in the online audience, we also have Shri Raj Bihari Bhattacharya, an Indian, our leading columnist and reporter on sustainability in Malaysia, whom we contacted yesterday, and he was supposed to be sitting. Mr. Bhattacharya, thank you very much for your gracious presence, and hope to get some coverage of this session and the conference in your writings. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Well, Dr. Razak, we have a tea break now.
I'm always somebody who makes best use of opportunities. And with Dr. Razak there in the other side and me here, I think what we could do is we could engage in a discussion on various aspects of sustainability and on decolonization. So I would like to join in the conversation. My friend and colleague Sanjoy too will join in the conversation. Others are welcome to join in the conversation, and sirs, Dr. Razak and the rest of the people who are on the other side also takes part in the discussion. So I would like to start off the discussion, sir, by talking about two aspects. The crisis of civilization that we face now is essentially a legacy of the last 300 years. Because as your slides were showing, in 1728, in the declaration from the government of Bhutan, it was saying that no government is good unless it talks about the welfare of its citizens. That's 1728. And by around 1750, we have the Industrial Revolution starting in Europe, and that actually brought about a paradigm change in our thought process. And that's where the process of colonization of the mind actually begins. So till then, it was man with nature, man as a part of nature. And maybe because we use the spell check so much, this a part became a unified word, and man became apart. And then we use the grammar correction auto, it became apart from nature. So man, being a part of nature, became man apart from nature. So man became separated from nature. Now, as a student of history, what is noticed is that the world is 5.5 billion years old. The first life on Earth appears about 300 million years ago. Human beings like you and me have been in this planet for 2 lakh years, 200,000 years. Our earliest knowledge of civilizations extends to just 5,000 years. So which means that for 1,95,000 years, we have absolutely no knowledge what human beings were doing in this earth. Were they running around trees, rubbing stone against stone to make fire, or were they examples of civilization that was very high? The picture that was shown by Dr. Razak of sustainable agriculture in the Philippines of rice fields that gently slope down, step farming, is something that the northeast of India is very, very familiar with. In the Apatani system of agriculture that is found everywhere, in Arunachal Pradesh, there is also the same type of cultivation followed in Nagaland, especially by the Angami tribe. So one thing that we have lost in the pursuit of westernization, which we have thought is modernization, everything that's Western is modern, we started our journey of a colonial mind. The language that I speak to all of you is neither mine nor yours, but I'm very, very comfortable speaking that language. Starts with language, ends off with culture. Now, what the Third World Network is doing from Malaysia is trying to reintroduce that to us. Now, if you look at the calendar, we are supposed to be such a scientific civilization. the modern industrial civilization, the year is divided into 365 days. But the time taken for the Earth to move around the sun is 365.6. It's 365 in a 1/4 day. So how do you calculate that? It's so modern, it's so scientific, right? Our ancient civilizations had calendars that actually took care of that. We normally follow the lunar calendar. This 365 days, we could not follow it, and it became something that got reintroduced as 365 days, and every 4 years you have a leap year. You had 1 day. So scientific. None of the calendars can actually predict when the rainfall is going to come. None of the solar calendars talk about when the seed has to be sowed, when the harvest has to be done. Go back to any ancient calendar and those are given. Why did we lose that in pursuit of the West? We talk of the Middle East, we talk of the Far East, we talk of the Near East. Far to what? Near to what? Middle to what? Europe. Europeans did not know about the existence of America, and they call it the discovery of America. You don't discover something that already existed, right? You just became aware of it. So the problem is that our systems of medicine are called the alternative systems. What is the mainstream? Allopathy. When did allopathy come about? During the war period. You just fix up somebody good enough to go and fight the next war. Surgery developed then. Medicines. So you see footballers, they get kicked by the opponent, they fall down, something is sprayed, and they're good enough to go and play again. Is there hurt, heal? No. They're just not aware. It's an anesthetic that is used to say that you're okay, you can go and play. But the problem is the injury would continue to be there, and it's going to plague the player later on in life. But our education system, it's gone. Now, in India, when the British came in, they did a survey of what was education, and they did not find a single village where there was no education. And how was education conducted? They were conducted underneath a tree maybe, and they found that to be very, very barbaric. The other barbaric practice, within quotes again, was that people were taught to write with their fingers in the sand. Modern research is showing that the nerves, the concentration of nerves on the fingertip is the highest. So when you write with your finger on the sand, the signals to your brain goes from your eyes and your fingertips. And if you force a child to hold a pencil or a pen and make him write A and B, it's A and B is not very normal. Children normally write in curves. So normally you'll see that a lot of children write their A as a V and they cut it and they straighten the page. Why is that? Because of a cognitive, it's not a disability. That's very, very natural. Research is also showing that if you force a child to go to school at 4 years, we call it pre-kindergarten or that play school, make him write A's and B's, and then force the child to use a pen and a pencil on paper, you actually destroy a large part of his cognitive abilities in the brain, which is very fluid at that point. Now it is being said that it's very, very good to write on the sand with your fingers when you're a child. That was part of our educational system. That is gone. Sir was talking about the new colonization that is coming up with certification and accreditation and stuff like that. If you write papers, it's got to be published in foreign journals, quote, European and American journals. Our journals are not good enough, and we are still following that. I feel very good if I get recognition in a Firangi university as opposed to maybe an university in Malaysia. So things have got to change. How do we change it? Probably the change starts from us, from here. I was very interested to know that even though Louis Pasteur Edward Jenner, they were supposed to be the founders of modern antibiotics. But in the year 17 something, I'm forgetting the date, there was a practice in India where smallpox was very common. They would inoculate people by actually injecting a live bacteria into people. And the wife of a very high-ranking British official went through the same process. It gives you the symptoms of the disease in a mild way, but you become immune to the disease later on. So, but the credit for coming about with new ideas about medicine started with the West. It's nothing to do. I used to be a documentary filmmaker for a part of my life. In the jungles of Arunachal, the tribesmen told us that eat this leaf, you will not get malaria. We kept on chewing the leaf all through the time we were inside the jungle, and none of us got malaria. Now, the modern system would say that catch hold of that plant, patent it, make it into a medicine, and some multinational corporation is going to earn billions of dollars and maybe even deny the very tribesmen who had that knowledge for hundreds of years that medicine, and they will not be able to produce the same medicine. In the morning, there was talk about the sacred forests, sacred groves. If you go to the sacred forest, there's one plant you're going to find in abundance in Mauplang. There's a small little plant, I mean, you can see it on the ground. It comes to a large tree. It's called the Texas Bagata. Texas Bagata in Khasi is known as Aksaya Blade, the tree of God. I don't know why it was called the tree of God. But later on, they find that this tree has got medicinal effects as far as the cure of cancer is concerned, and it is being used to create a cancer-curing drug. So did that knowledge exist with us traditionally? There is a very, very strong possibility. A handful of soil has got millions of microbes, and that microbe, because they interact with one another, gives soil its living character. Soil is a living character. But in our modern techno-economic terms, soil is a factor of production. Now, when soil is a factor of production, so what you do is, if you want to increase production, you try and increase the ability of the soil to produce more. So what do you add? You add nutrients. So you add phosphate, you add urea, you add I don't know what. Now, what about the microbes that are surviving there? So an excess of urea, an excess of whatever kills those microbes. So after about 15 years, 20 years of use, that land becomes barren. We are facing that in those areas that were the harbingers of the Green Revolution. So, which means Punjab has one of the highest cancer rates in the country. Every day a train goes from Punjab to Chandigarh carrying to the PGI Chandigarh. It's known as the cancer train. Is that the price one has to pay for increasing food production? Are there other ways of increasing food production? My PhD was on the history of Assam. And when I was doing my PhD, we noticed that there were 20,000 rice varieties that were indigenous to the Brahmaputra Valley. 20,000. It was a mind-boggling number. I went and presented my findings in a seminar in Calcutta. One young gentleman sitting in the back raises his hand and he says, "Sir, you're making a mistake with the numbers." I thought I must have slipped up somewhere. It must be lesser than that. So he was doing his PhD in a European university, and they were very rigorous about a lot of stuff. His findings was 30,000 varieties. Whether it's 30,000, whether it's 20,000, doesn't matter. But as of today, there are about 6 or 7 or 8 varieties of rice that's being cultivated. And they don't have names, they have numbers. Now, the question is, what happens to diversity? Without diversity, we are all gone. So traditional systems talk about preserving the biodiversity. And we have no idea what biodiversity is all about. So I would like to leave time and space for others to, the next session is at 4. Yes.
I'm joining now.
Okay. Yeah.
First of all, thank you, sir. Thank you for this amazing lecture. It was a delight to hear you. And since you gave a lot of examples, I recall the book that has all those examples. The Rampalji has written those 5 volumes, and I highly recommend others also to just, whenever you get an opportunity, just go through those 5 volumes. You will realize the beauty of India, how beautiful our country was, how rich our culture was. In terms of education, sir, you spoke. We were having this discussion on education. So the Britishers found out that in Madras there were more people going to the schools, the gurukuls. We had the system of gurukuls rather than those people in all of England. We had more children schooling and educating. Our children were being taught, mathematics, statistics, astronomy, and whatnot. But they were just, their education revolved just around a couple of subjects. So we were always more rich, but then, that's what the idea was, to suppress us, to, term us as savages. As you told, people writing on this thing. In fact, sir, very recently, I'll give you an example. One of my friends from Europe came. So I asked him to eat food with hands, eat biryani with hands. And he said that this is more practical than eating with fork. So, people over there, they are, hum haldi doodh peete hai na roz. So they are terming it as turmeric latte and enjoying it. They have adopted. Yeah, I mean, we can actually laugh about it, but that's the reality. We have always been more rich. We have been, we have an amazing culture, but sadly, we are not appreciating, we are not recognizing. But the West is adopting it, and we are, just running after their mode of, working and all that. So we need to go back to our roots, recognize what was ours, and get back to those sustainable systems. One more thing I would like to add, like in the 1920s, when Gandhiji wrote Gram Swaraj, I mean, this is one very beautiful book that I've read. When Gandhiji wrote Gram Swaraj, if you read that book, you will find that the concept of minimalism, the concept of circular economy, the concept of sustainable development, all of it is embedded in our culture, our rural systems and all. The people whom you call as illiterate, the people whom you call as, you don't even recognize, those people actually have sustainability embedded in their life. So how is it possible that a tribal over here is, less educated than me, I guess they know more than us. They have got, and it's high time we appreciate the indigenous technical knowledge systems and, appreciate them and, just get back to what belongs to us. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. So one amazing thing about this conference is that most people have come before time. So the next speaker is scheduled to speak at 4, but he's already online. So tea, I'm sure Sitanshu served inside or what? Okay. So I hand over proceedings to my colleague Sanjay. He will welcome.
Before I welcome our very good friend, Professor Dr. Rastos online, regarding this decolonization, if Dr. Razak is here, I would like to point to one particular book. Rampalji was mentioned by your friend, but this, not book, but it was actually not an article, it was a text of a lecture which was delivered in 1930. It was called Swaraj in Ideas by the dawn of Indian philosophy in the 20th century. So there he made a distinction. He precisely talked about this decolonization of mind and making a clear distinction between the shadow mind, which is a colonized mind, and an authentic mind. So I just thought I refer to this. This is a text which inspired me about 30 years back when I was reading in a house in Calcutta. That was 35 years back. Yeah. So Swaraj in ideas, not just Swaraj. I think it was that the lecture was delivered at a time when Swaraj was, that was 1930. We declared full Swaraj, you remember, Lahore Congress. But at that time, this lecture was given by this person who was the principal of college in Bengal. Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya, or better known as K.C. Bhattacharya, Swaraj in Ideas. Okay. I thought that I would just supplement my colleague and friend Sanjeev had taken you to a completely different domain, so I won't enter into this course right now. You absorb that what he said, and we go quickly to our next speaker, Professor Dr. Laszlo is online. Laszlo, you are here?
Yes, I am here.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, but Sanjoy, so we are
Let me ask.
starting in 7 or 10 minutes from now. It's not.
Again, but before that, I want students to introduce you a little, and you also check whether it's okay. Can you listen to us properly? Can you see us properly?
He's saying he'll start in 7 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, you start in 7 to 10 minutes. Sure. We have that time with us. Please.
So can we start in 10 minutes or?
Sure.
Okay, I am here. I will be back in 6-7 minutes. Okay.
So we are also quickly having our tea and coming back in 8 to 9 minutes so that we can start in 10 minutes from now, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. See you later.
Thank you. Thank you.
Invite you for a cup of tea in the adjacent room.